You're listening to Straight No Chaser, the only show to quench your talk radio thirst. Some programs dilute the issues. We only serve the hard stuff. Old school, new school. Grab a glass and welcome your hosts, the Chief, MBZ, and Pastor C.
The now 81-year-old is the first celebrity of the hashtag #MeToo era to be sentenced to jail. A judge declaring the disgraced comedian a sexually violent predator, saying, "It is time for justice, Mr. Cosby. This has all circled back to you. The time has come."
The time has come. That, of course, was from Good Morning America, as they reported the tragic demise of America's dad, Bill Cosby. Tonight, we're talking about sexual misconduct with the hashtag #WhyIDidn'tReport. Welcome to Straight No Chaser, where we never dilute the issues, we always serve the hard stuff. I'm the Chief, and I'm joined by Thin Bad, and later on we'll be joined by MBZ. And Thin Bad, of course, tonight will be filling in for Pastor C. So much has been occurring this week around the issue of sexual misconduct. Bill Cosby was sentenced. There is a huge hearing in Washington on Thursday, and now attorney Michael Avenatti just came forward with additional allegations against Judge Kavanaugh. And we see now that allegations of sexual harassment and misconduct are becoming more and more prevalent across the country. The primary catalyst appears to be the Me Too movement, which became very popular in 2017 on social media and began as a protest against sexual harassment and sexual assault. It is believed the movement was responsible for the downfall of media mogul Harvey Weinstein, former CBS executive Les Moonves, Senator Al Franken, Bill Cosby, and now it is front and center at the Supreme Court nomination hearings. And again, good evening, Thin Bad. How are you, sir?
Well, good to be here with you. Good to be here with you once again. It has been an interesting week indeed.
It has. And you know, Thin Bad, just to be clear, the Bill Cosby case is a criminal matter. He was tried, right. He was convicted, and he was sentenced to 3 to 10 years.
Right.
And the Kavanaugh matter at this point, at least at this point, is an administrative matter based on a background process to determine his fitness to hold that lifetime appointment as a Supreme Court justice. However, we can't forget, though, both incidents revolve around allegations of sexual misconduct and the accounts of victims who came forward after many years. And just like anything else, there are many, including the president and those who are supporting Mr. Cosby and others who have questioned, why did the victims wait so long to come forward? Is that a fair question to ask? Don't know. Is it or isn't it? We'll talk about that. And are they insinuating that the victims are lying? And we're going to talk about that. So fortunately tonight, we have attorney Attar Hazabullah, and he's here to help us sort this out. Mr. Hazabullah is a Las Vegas-based attorney who brings years of experience with sexual misconduct-related matters. Welcome to the show, Mr. Hazabullah.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. We are so glad that you agreed to come on because we just have a ton of questions, and we need your legal expertise to kind of help us work through this. But before we get into this, let me remind our listeners, you can call us at 702-425-7789, or you can certainly feel free to chat live with us as we move on. So, Mr. Hazabullah, I just want to find out. Let me throw out the first question. I'm sure Thin Bad will be jumping in with some questions. Do you think this? Well, let me not even ask that question yet. Give me your opinion on the verdict.
The Cosby verdict?
Yes, sir.
I think the verdict was appropriate. The sentencing that's kind of where the question lies. Was the sentence appropriate? It's certainly in accordance with what the judge could have done. I don't necessarily view it as an unfair sentence. It's certainly, at the minimum, the punishment that he likely should have received, at least in my opinion, based off what the legal findings were in that matter, and the findings of fact were in that matter. But at the same time, people are now examining the disparate treatment, one might argue, between what's happened in that particular case versus the confirmation hearings involving Judge Kavanaugh. So it's sort of a unique time to have two allegations and two issues of the sort hit the media spotlight at the exact same time.
Sure. Now, do you think the verdict and the trial and the fact that this trial and all of the related activities came so many years later, do you think that will encourage others who have been victims to sexual misconduct? Do you think that will encourage them to come forward?
It certainly should. There's a couple reasons why the law is somewhat more relaxed in terms of disclosing these types of crimes late. There's an entire field of research devoted to the phenomenon known as delayed disclosure. And predominantly in cases dealing with sexual assault or sexual deviancy, there's an advantage of power and control that the abuser generally has. Victims are shamed into staying quiet. So what you've seen in this instance with respect to Mr. Cosby is that you've had a track record of years of sexual abuses and assaults committed. And it was only after the first couple cases came forward that you started hearing from other victims of his. By all accounts at this point, this is a serially criminal matter. It wasn't one victim that was involved in this incident. It was many. And the goal of, I think, part of the Me Too movement as a whole has been to make sure that there's not a distinction made based on whether or not the abuser has a level of fame or power that others might not have. So by exposing someone in as powerful of a position as Mr. Cosby, in theory, that should perpetuate the desire for those who have been victims of abuse in other instances to possibly speak up. But again, it's a very difficult, sort of case to report. You're not dealing with your run-of-the-mill case where someone just had $1 or $2 stolen from them, or there may have been a burglary somewhere else, or there might have been two people fighting. Crimes of sexuality are oftentimes the most shameful for victims in terms of reporting, which is why you end up having so many victims that ultimately end up staying silent.
Wow. Then, man, what did you have for him?
He hit that on the head, because that's been, that's the question that goes around. I think, if it's something that's never happened to you, then I don't think I think you just ought to just shut up about what it is, why you're, so many people are throwing around their opinions about why they wait so long, or why, and that goes to my point, that I was making, try to hit last week, is everything seems to point to the victim. All the questions that are swirling around are, why did it take so long? How come nobody else is knows the story? Or how come that was at that point? Now we've got other people coming out. But I think if people don't, if they've never been through it, and you haven't, walked in those shoes, then I think you just have to be quiet about it. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like, and all that these folks' lives are forever changed. Everybody involved. The people who've come forward, even the people who've been named who aren't saying anything, or imagine the people, that there are other people just kind of sitting on the sidelines wondering what is it that they should do. I knew when I heard there was one person, I said, it's probably more. If someone else is going to come through. So it'll be interesting to see how all this all plays out tomorrow. And it is quite ironic that you have these two mainstream situations happening, and it'll be, of course, then they'll be watching how one was treated as opposed to the other. People are already, I'm looking around on Facebook and I'm seeing people now saying, well, this is what's happening to Cosby and what's going to happen to Kavanaugh. Is he just going to coast right on in? But of course, as you stipulated and made the connection before, one is or the distinction before, I'm sorry, one is a criminal matter that was dealt with, and this one is just allegations and whether they're trying to figure this out. It'll be interesting to see. My issue, one of the problems that I have is it appears that it's almost like I'm getting the feeling that Dr. Ford is going to be on trial. When she's just kind of bringing forth information, but just to have that feeling, and I'm sure if I'm thinking that, I'm sure she feels, the same way that am I on trial? I'm not the one trying to be a Supreme Court justice.
Sure,
but
sure.
It looks like everything is on her.
Well,
if I can add on
two
quick comments to that,
yes, sir.
Because I think you touched on two really good points. Actually, my understanding is that the Republican side of the Judiciary Committee has actually hired a former prosecutor to process the questions against Dr. Ford. So it will seem like the victim is on trial, which doesn't happen really with any other crime at all. But the second point I wanted to bring up real quick is an interesting one that I think a lot of folks are sort of neglecting as more and more of these victims start to come forward, and the concept of disclosure continues to exist. Much was the same way as Mr. Cosby. There's no guarantee that there might not be a future indictment for any of these actions against Judge Kavanaugh. So you very realistically could at some point see in the future a sitting United States Supreme Court justice that's indicted for sexual crimes that previously occurred.
Well, that's interesting, and hold that thought too, Attorney Hazabula, because we want to definitely get into that. And I want to just circle right back around to the Cosby verdict for just a second. Did you expect a guilty verdict?
Absolutely. I don't think there was any question.
Okay. And so with the whole, and one of the things, and by the way, I was not impressed with his publicist at all. But one of the things that they kept bringing up was it appeared to be racist. They brought up the concern, and I know that they were talking about bringing this on appeal, that the tape that was played was altered. And they also talked about being able to use the civil deposition in a criminal matter. Can you kind of talk about those three things, if you will?
Sure. I think at its core, when people are aligning the issue as being racial, really at its core right now is you see a guy like Judge Kavanaugh who's sitting, possibly about to be confirmed in the United States Supreme Court, and then you draw a direct parallel to Mr. Cosby, who's now sitting in a jail cell. But when we examine those two, the real outrage isn't, or shouldn't be at least, that Mr. Cosby was convicted of these crimes for however many years and against however many women he's committed these crimes against, but rather that there's someone who's part of the majority race that's getting away with it, right? So when we look at it, it's not that. I think the argument that continues to exist, and I would hate to see it if folks are saying that that Bill Cosby should have got off rather than those who are committing sexual assaults against women, regardless of their race, should be convicted of those and punished accordingly. With respect to the actual hearings themselves and the tape alterations, there's really not that fine of a line with consent. It's either a yes or no. It's quite simple. And if you're drugging someone and they're waking up with no memory of what's happened, and it's not a one situation or two situation, you hear dozens of the same story coming forward, women of all different backgrounds, ethnicities, ages, time frames. It's troubling. I mean, by all indications, this is someone who is a serial rapist. And I think that's the issue people are struggling with, because his image has been so strong historically that people still view him